I have spent 19 years learning the exact weight of a rule. That is not a boast. It is closer to a confession, and I have decided the confession is owed, because there was a morning last winter when the rules I had polished all my working life very nearly made me do the most shameful thing I have ever almost done. My name is Nadia Frost, and at the time I ran the day operations of the North Terminal at Aldermere International in the Kingdom of Eldermoor. If you have flown through Aldermere, you have probably never seen me, and that is exactly how I liked it. A well-run terminal is an invisible one. Belts move, gates close on time, the queues breathe in and out, and nobody thinks about the person who keeps the machine honest. I was that person. I had a lanyard the color of dried blood, a radio that never left my shoulder, and a reputation, earned and enjoyed, for being the one supervisor at Aldermere who could not be talked around. Charm did not work on me. Tears did not work on me. A raised voice worked least of all. I had heard every story a delayed passenger could invent, and I had a policy folder in my head thicker than the one in the compliance office. So when the man in the long dark coat came through the far doors of Hall B at 6:07 that morning, walking with a case pressed flat against his chest as though it were part of his own ribs, my first thought was not respect. My first thought was, there is a problem, and it is walking toward my terminal. You could have told me he was a soldier from across the concourse. It was in the spine before it was in anything else. Aldermere sees thousands of travelers a day, and they all wear the same defeated slump, the shoulders rounded over a phone, the drift and shuffle of people being processed. This man walked as if the floor owed him a straight line. He was tall, and the coat could not hide the shape underneath it, a shape that had been drilled into squareness. His shoes struck the polished stone in a rhythm I could have set a metronome to. He was perhaps 35, clean-shaven, his hair cut close and correct, and his face had the particular stillness that I would later come to understand was not calm at all, but the enormous effort of a man holding something shut. And the case? That was what my eyes went to and would not leave. It was not a suitcase. It was a hard, rectangular box, longer than a briefcase and deeper, its surface a dull black with reinforced corners, and it had two broad straps that he had not slung over his shoulder the way any sensible traveler would. Instead, he carried it against his chest with both arms, one hand under it, one hand flat across the top, the way you carry something you have promised not to drop. Around it, tucked under the top strap, was a folded length of cloth I could not make out at that distance dark, with a band of color at one edge. Every alarm I owned went off at once. In my line of work, a passenger who will not let go of a sealed container the size of a holdall, who has strapped something to the outside of it, who moves through a public terminal with his eyes fixed forward and his jaw locked, is not a passenger. He is an incident waiting for a location. I had been trained, retrained, and drilled on exactly this silhouette. You do not ignore it. You engage it early, calmly, and you control the space around it. I keyed my radio. Control, this is Frost. I'm on the Hall B concourse. I've got a solo male, dark coat, carrying a large hard case against his body, non-standard. I'm going to make contact. Have screening 2 ready and put a marshal on a slow walk toward me. No noise. Copy, Frost. Rolling. I stepped out from behind the assistant's desk where I had been sorting a rebooking mess, and I put myself, without hurry, in the man's path. Not blocking, never block, that reads as a challenge but angled so that his straight line would bend gently toward me. I had done it 10,000 times. It is the choreography of my whole career, the polite interception that lets a person believe stopping was their own idea. He stopped. He did not have to bend his line. He simply saw me and halted squarely at a distance of exactly 1 pace, and looked at me with a pair of gray eyes that held no fear and no guilt and no impatience, which, I will tell you, unsettled me more than any of those 3 would have. Frightened people I understand. Guilty people I catch. Impatient people I outlast. This man's eyes had none of it. They had only a kind of grave attention, as if I were a checkpoint he had known would be here, and had already decided to pass through without lying and without yielding. "Good morning, sir," I said, in the level, pleasant voice that is really a set of hands testing a door. "I'm the duty manager for this terminal. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about your journey today." "Good morning." His voice was low and even, and it too was a controlled thing. "You may ask." "That's a substantial case you're carrying. Are you traveling with us this morning or meeting someone?" "I am traveling. I have a connection out of this terminal in 1 hour and 50 minutes. He did not offer more. He did not volunteer his gait, his flight, his reason, his life story, the way 99 passengers in 100 will do the instant you show interest, spilling detail in the hope that friendliness will earn them a shortcut. He answered the question I asked and closed his mouth and waited. "May I ask what's in the case?" And here is where the morning began to turn, though I did not know it yet. His arms, if anything, tightened a fraction around the box. Not a flinch, a settling, the way a man braces a load he has been carrying a long way and intends to carry further. "I am not able to open it," he said, "and it cannot go through separate screening away from me. I will walk it through any scanner you like in my own hands in your sight. It does not leave my hands. Those are my instructions, and I will not break them." Now you have to understand what that sentence sounds like to a person in my job. It does not sound like grief. It does not sound like ceremony. It sounds like every training video, every red flag briefing, every terrible morning we all live in fear of. A man who will not open a container. A man who will not let it out of his physical control. A man who has, in his own words, instructions. My stomach did the cold, professional drop it is trained to do, and every soft feeling in me went behind glass. "Sir," I said, and my voice had cooled to match, "I understand you have instructions, but this is an international terminal, and I'm afraid your instructions don't override our security process. Anything that passes into the departure area goes through screening. If it can't be screened, it can't go through. That's not my rule, and it's not a matter of trust. It applies to everyone without exception, and there is no version of today where a sealed case goes into my departure lounge unexamined. So I'm going to ask you to come with me calmly to a screening room, and we'll sort out what this is." For the first time something moved in his face. It was not anger. I have been shouted at by men twice his size, and I know the shape of anger. This was closer to pain, quickly mastered, a tightening at the corner of the eyes, a swallow, the smallest downward pull of the mouth, all of it gone almost before it arrived, packed away behind that terrible discipline. "I will come to the room," he said. "I will show you my authority to carry it. But I tell you now before we walk so that you are not surprised, I will let you look. I will not let you take it from my hands, and I will not open it here among all these people on a table for strangers to see. What is in this case has already been through more than you or I will see in our lives, and it has one journey left, and I am the man charged to walk beside it. If honoring that costs me my connection, then I will miss my connection, but I will not set it down." I have replayed those words more times than I can count. At the time, God forgive me, I heard mostly the refusal. I heard a passenger telling me what he would and would not permit in my terminal, and the part of me that had spent 19 years being the one who could not be talked around set its heels. What is in this case has already been through more than you or I will see in our lives. I heard it as theater. I heard it as the sort of line a smuggler rehearses. I keyed my radio again, turning half away, keeping my body between him and the marshal I could see drifting up on my left. Control, subject is compliant but refusing to surrender the item or open it. Cites instructions and authority to carry. I'm taking him to screening room 2. I want Vosk there, and I want the room, not the desk. Discreetly. That was my second mistake of the morning, and it was a bigger one than the first, though it would take me an hour to see it. The first mistake was hearing a threat where there was a vigil. The second was calling Rennick Vosk. Vosk was the shift lead for security in the North Terminal, and if I was known for being unmovable, Vosk was known for enjoying it. He was a big, deliberate man with a flat, unhurried way of speaking that some people found reassuring, and I had always found faintly like a door being closed slowly in your face. He had come to us from somewhere he never quite named, and he treated every anomaly as a personal insult that he intended to resolve. He would, I knew, back my authority to the hilt. That was exactly why I wanted him, and exactly why I should not have. We walked. The man in the dark coat came without argument, at my shoulder, the case still clasped against his chest, and I noticed as we went that people turned to look. Not the ordinary drifting glance of a bored queue. They turned and they held the look, and a few of them went quiet, and one older man near the newspaper kiosk went very still and set down the cup he was holding. I registered it the way you register weather, as background, and I kept walking. And I did not yet ask myself why a coffee-scented concourse full of half-asleep travelers would fall quiet at the sight of a soldier in a black box. The screening room off the side of Hall B is small and gray and honest. A steel table, 2 chairs, a scanner arch, an X-ray belt, cameras in 2 corners, and a light that flatters no one. It is where we take the ones we need to look at properly, and it has seen a great deal of shouting. Vosk was already inside when I brought the man through, standing with his arms folded and his weight settled, filling the far end of the room in the way he had. "This the one," he said, not to the man but to me over the man, as though the soldier were a parcel I had delivered. "This is the passenger," I said, with a small emphasis I hoped Vosk would take and knew he wouldn't. "He's carrying a sealed hard case he won't surrender or open. Says he has authority to carry it." I said we'd review that authority here. Vosk let his eyes travel down the length of the man, over the coat, the polished shoes, the case, the folded cloth strapped to the top of it, and something in his face made a small, satisfied movement, the look of a man who has been given a puzzle he already believes he has solved. "Right," he said, "let's have it on the table then." "No," said the man in the coat. He said it quietly. He said it without heat. But he said it in a way I had not heard a person say a word to Vosk in the 3 years we had worked the same shifts, as a simple, closed fact, the way you would say water is wet. And Vosk, who fed on defiance the way a fire feeds on wind, unfolded his arms and smiled a small cold smile and took 1 step forward, and I felt the whole morning tip, very slightly, toward something I did not want. "Let me explain how this works," Vosk began in the flat, unhurried voice, and I wanted on the record that even I, even the unmovable Frost, felt the wrongness of that voice in that small gray room, aimed at that still and grieving man, before I understood a single true thing about why he had come. "In this terminal—" "May I," said the man in the coat, "show you my papers before you explain the terminal to me? I think when you have read them, you will want to change how the next few minutes go." And he did not wait for permission. Slowly, with one hand, keeping the other flat and unmoving on the top of the case, he reached into the breast of his dark coat and drew out a folded document sleeve of heavy gray card, sealed with a wax-colored crest I did not at first recognize, and laid it on the steel table between us, and stepped back to exactly his previous distance, and waited. Vosk did not touch it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a card trick he is sure he can expose. But I reached out, because reading things was my job, and I opened the gray sleeve and I began to read, and the cold professional glass I had put over my feelings developed, in the space of about 4 lines, a long and silent crack. The document was headed with the arms of the Royal House of Harrogate, the crest I had failed to place, because who expects to hold it in their hands on a gray Tuesday in a screening room? Below the arms, in the sober, spare language of an official order, it named the man in front of me, Colour Sergeant Elias Rourke, of the King's Guard. And it named his duty, and it was that word duty set down in ink and sealed with authority that put the first true chill through me, because it was not the word a smuggler would forge. Smugglers forge invoices. They do not forge grief. Colour Sergeant Elias Rourke is hereby appointed conducting escort for the repatriation of the remains of Lance-Corporal Danic Wren, King's Guard, who died in the service of the Crown while deployed on the honor detail at the Eldermoor legation abroad. The conducting escort is charged to accompany the fallen without interruption from the place of his death to the hands of his family, to permit no separation between himself and his charge at any stage of the journey, and to bear the regimental colors, the decorations, and the personal effects of the deceased as the sacred trust of the regiment. This charge is given under the hand of the king. I read it twice. I read the last 5 words twice more, under the hand of the king. And then I looked up at the case pressed against Elias Rourke's chest, at the folded dark cloth strapped beneath the top strap, the cloth I had taken for a scarf or a rolled jacket, and I understood, all at once and far too late, that the band of color at its edge was the border of a folded flag, and that the case did not hold contraband and did not hold a weapon and did not hold anything I had been trained to fear. It held a young man's medals. It held his cap. It held the folded colors that had lain over him. It held whatever a family gets back when they do not get back the person. And the man I had intercepted, the man I had called a security lead into a gray room to break, was not being difficult. He was standing guard over a friend. He was doing the last thing that could still be done for someone who could no longer be helped, and he had been doing it. I would learn, across 3 borders in 4 days and 2,000 miles, without sleeping more than an hour at a stretch, because his orders and his own heart forbade him to let the case out of his arms even long enough to lie down. I have been ashamed in my life. Everyone has. But I do not think I have ever felt shame arrive as fast or as completely as it did in that gray room, with the flat light on the steel table and the sealed order open under my hands. "Mr. Vosk," I said, and my voice did not sound like mine. "Step back, please." Vosk did not step back. Vosk had not read the paper. Vosk was looking at Rourke with the fixed, pleased expression of a man about to win, and he said, in the unhurried voice, "I don't care what the paper says. Papers can say anything. Procedure is procedure. That case goes on the belt or it goes nowhere, and if he won't put it on the belt, then he's refusing a lawful screening instruction, and you know what that means, Frost. That means it's not our problem anymore. That means we make a call and we let the proper people come and open it for him." "Mr. Vosk," I said again, and I put the sealed order flat on the table and turned it so the arms of the royal house faced him, and I set my finger under the last line. "Read that. Read the last line and then tell me again who the proper people are." He read it. I watched him read it. I watched the flat certainty in his face meet the word king and stumble. And then, because Rennick Vosk was the kind of man who would rather be cruel than wrong, I watched him decide not to let it stop him. "Could be genuine," he said. "Could be a very good forgery. That's not for me to judge, and it's not for you to judge, Frost, and the moment we start waving people through on the strength of a fancy letter is the moment this terminal becomes the softest target in the kingdom. I've seen documents like this before." He had not. "The procedure exists precisely so that a nice story and a wax seal don't get to skip it. He opens the case, we verify the contents, and if it's all as he says, he's on his way with my sincere condolences. But he opens it. Here. Now." And Elias Rourke, who had stood through all of this without a word, without a shift of his feet, spoke again, and his voice had dropped even lower, and there was something in it now that had not been there before, something that made the small hairs rise on my arms. "I have opened this case exactly once," he said, "in the presence of his mother's brother at the border, so that a customs officer with more decency than authority could see with his own eyes that I carried a man and not a crime, and I watched that officer take off his cap and turn away because he could not keep his face still. I will not open it again on a steel table under a strip light so that you can be certain of something you already know. You do not doubt what is in this case. You have read the paper. You doubt whether you have to care. Those are different things, and only one of them is my concern. The room went very quiet. I want to be fair to the person I was that morning, because I have been unfair to Vosk in this account, and it would be easy to make myself the good one by contrast. The truth is that when Rourke said those words, "You doubt whether you have to care," I felt them land on me as much as on Vosk, because I had felt exactly that doubt out on the concourse, when I heard a grieving man tell me what his heart forbade, and I heard only a passenger telling me the rules did not apply to him. The difference between Vosk and me, the only difference, and I hold on to it, is that when the truth was put in front of me, I let it change me, and Vosk had already decided that being changed was a kind of losing. "Colour Sergeant," I said, and I heard my own voice steady itself around the rank, giving it the weight it was owed. "Thank you for your patience. I've read your order, and I have no doubt at all about what you're carrying or why. Here is what we're going to do." I turned to Vosk before he could speak. "We are going to screen the case in the sergeant's own hands. We have a wand, and we have the arch, and we have eyes. He walks it through the arch himself. We wand it. We do a swab. At no point does anyone but the sergeant touch it, and at no point does it open. If it clears, and it will clear, he goes to his gate with an escort and our respect. That is a lawful screening. That satisfies procedure, and it does not require us to make a grieving man pry the lid off his friend's coffin box on a table. Are we agreed?" "We are not agreed," Vosk said. "We don't need to be," I said. "I'm the duty manager. This is my terminal and my call, and I've made it, and it's logged as made. If you have a concern, you can raise it up the chain after the sergeant has made his connection, and I will stand behind every word. Now step away from the table, Mr. Vosk. You're standing too close to a man who has come a very long way, and it isn't kind." I do not know where the last sentence came from. It was not procedure. It was not in any folder. But it did what nothing else had done. It made Vosk look for 1 second not at Rourke and not at me, but at himself. A big man in a small gray room, leaning over a soldier and a box of a dead boy's medals, on the strength of a certainty he had manufactured because being unmovable was the only thing he knew how to be. He did not apologize. Men like Vosk do not apologize. They retreat and call it strategy. But he unfolded from his lean and stepped back to the wall, and he said, "This is on you, Frost." And I said, "Yes, it is." And I meant it as gladly as I have ever meant anything. We screened the case in Elias Rourke's own hands. He carried it through the arch himself, cradled to his chest, and the arch stayed silent. I ran the wand over every surface myself, close and slow and careful, the way you would run a hand over something you had been told was fragile, and it found nothing but the honest signatures of metal, the buckles, the metal clasps, the frame. I took a swab from the seams with my own gloved fingers and fed it to the machine, and the machine thought about it and produced a small green word. And I looked at the small green word for a moment longer than I needed to, because it was, I realized, the machine agreeing with what my whole body already knew, that this man was exactly what he said he was, and that I had almost done something to him that I would never have washed off. "You're cleared, Colour Sergeant," I said. "You should have been cleared out on the concourse, and I'm sorry it wasn't so. I'm going to walk you to your gate myself." "Thank you." He inclined his head, a small precise bow that was somehow more moving than any flood of gratitude would have been. And then, because he was the kind of man he was, he added, "You did not have to change your mind. Most people, once they have taken a position in front of others, would rather be wrong all the way to the end than right in the last minute. I have watched a great many people take positions. I will remember that you were not one of them. It should have ended there. In a fairer world it would have ended there, a quiet correction, a good man walked to his gate, a lesson I would keep. But the morning was not finished with any of us, because when I opened the door of the gray room to walk Colour Sergeant Rourke to his connection, I found the concourse outside had changed, and the reason it had changed was standing very still by the newspaper kiosk with his cup set down and his old, straight back squared, and he was not going to let this pass unmarked. He was an elderly man, perhaps 75, in a plain brown coat with a cloth cap in one hand, and he had the same thing in his spine that Rourke had, only older, softened by decades and stiffened by them at once. He had watched me lead the soldier into the gray room a quarter of an hour before. He had, I would learn, refused to move from the spot the whole time we were inside, ignoring his own boarding call twice, telling the gate agent who came to fetch him that he would take the next flight or no flight, that he was not leaving until he saw how they treated that boy. And now the door had opened, and he saw Elias Rourke come out with the case still against his chest and me at his shoulder, and he saw the folded flag under the strap, and the old man's face did something that broke my heart clean across. He came toward us slowly because his hips did not permit anything else, and he stopped in front of Rourke, and he looked at the case, and then he looked up into the younger man's face, and he said, in a voice roughened by age and something else, "Who are you bringing home, son?" Rourke did not answer at once. I saw him weigh it, whether to give the polite deflection, the "I'm afraid I can't discuss it," that his discipline had ready. And then he looked at the old man's cap held against his chest, and at the small enameled pin on the man's lapel that I could not read but that Rourke plainly could, and he decided the truth was owed to this one. "Lance-Corporal Danic Wren, sir," he said. "King's Guard, 23 years old. He died on the honor detail abroad. I'm taking him back to his mother." The old man closed his eyes. He stood there with his eyes closed and his cap over his heart, and the concourse noise going on around us, the departure announcements, the wheels of luggage, the coffee machines, and when he opened them they were wet and perfectly steady. 23, he said. "I buried men that age. A long time ago now, but you don't forget the age. It's always the age that stays with you." He straightened, and it cost him, and he brought his heels together as well as they would go, and he raised his right hand to the brim of a cap that was in his other hand and saluted the black case in Elias Rourke's arms, saluted it slowly, and held it, an old soldier's salute to a young one he had never met and never would. I have run a terminal for a long time. I have seen people say goodbye at those doors, and I have seen people meet after years apart, and I have seen every ordinary miracle and disaster that a busy airport produces in a day. I had never seen anything like the old man's salute, and I have not seen anything like it since. It was not for show. He did not know anyone was filming, though by then several people were. He did it because it was the only true thing left to do, and because 40 years of being taught how had never worn the instinct out of him. And here is the thing about a salute in a public place. It is a question posed to everyone who sees it. It asks, "Do you understand what this is?" And it demands an answer. The concourse of the North Terminal at Aldermere on a Tuesday morning is not a reverent place. It is a river of hurried, distracted, private people, each one sealed inside their own small emergency of a missed connection or a late cab or a phone that will not connect. It is the least likely congregation in the world. And yet I watched the old man's salute move through that crowd like a change in the pressure of the air. The people nearest went still first, a businessman lowering his phone, a young couple stopping mid-stride, a woman with a coffee frozen halfway to her mouth. Then the stillness spread outward, table by table, group by group, as the ones behind saw the ones in front go quiet and turned to see what they were seeing. A hush is a physical thing. I felt it settle over Hall B like a hand, laid gently on the back of the neck of a whole crowd. Elias Rourke stood at the center of it, and I watched him understand what was happening, and I watched it nearly undo the discipline that 4 days and 2,000 miles had not managed to break. His jaw worked once. His eyes went bright, but he did not let it fall. Instead, he did the only correct thing, the thing his whole life had prepared him to do. He shifted the case a little higher against his chest, and he turned his body a few degrees so that the folded flag beneath the strap faced the old man squarely, and he came to attention, and he returned the salute, not with his hand, because both his hands were full of his friend, but with his eyes and his spine and a slow, deep inclination of his head, a bow to the older man that acknowledged everything the salute had said. "Frost, it was my radio low from control. What's happening down there? We've got half the concourse gone quiet on the cameras and about 30 phones out. Do you need marshals?" I lifted the radio to my mouth, and I looked at the old man lowering his stiff arm, and at the crowd standing silent around a soldier and a black case, and at Rennick Vosk in the doorway of the gray room behind me with an expression I could not read, and I made a decision that was not in any folder either. "No," I said into the radio. "I don't need marshals. Stand everyone down. Nothing is wrong here. Something is right for once, and I'm not going to interrupt it." I clicked off before control could argue. Then I turned to Elias Rourke and I said quietly, so that only he and the old man could hear, "Colour Sergeant, you have an hour and a half. I'd like to make sure the rest of your journey through my terminal is worthy of the man you're carrying. Will you let me help you?" And Elias Rourke, who had refused Vosk and refused the belt and refused every pressure of that gray room, looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Yes, I would be grateful for that, because I will tell you honestly, I am very tired and I have been afraid all this way of exactly what nearly happened in that room. Not the delay. The idea that he would arrive home having been treated at the last as a suspicion. He deserves better than that for the last mile. If you can give him better than that, then yes, help me. I have thought a great deal since about the phrase the last mile. There is a bitter irony in it that I did not feel until later. Danic Wren had crossed a war zone and 3 borders and the whole width of the world, carried the entire way by a man who would not sleep, and the place where his homecoming had come closest to being spoiled, the place where he had been treated as a suspicion, was not the border, not the war, not the long, dangerous roads. It was my terminal. It was the clean, safe, orderly, rule-bound heart of his own kingdom, 400 miles from his mother's door. We are so careful, in places like Aldermere, about the wrong things. We screen for the blade and miss the man. I had built my whole career on being the one who could not be talked around, and I had very nearly used that career to fail the one traveler in 10,000 who deserved everything I had. I was not going to fail him for the rest of it. I keyed my radio one more time, and this time my voice had something in it that made control go quiet on the other end. "This is Frost. I need the terminal duty log open, and I need it noted that I'm invoking a courtesy escort under my own authority, and I need 3 things brought to Hall B quietly in the next 10 minutes. I drew a breath. "I'll tell you what they are, and then I'm going to need you to trust me, the way I should have trusted a good man 20 minutes ago and didn't." The 3 things were small. I asked for a chair, a proper chair, from the executive lounge, not one of the molded plastic benches, set in a quiet corner behind the assistant's desk, where a tired man could sit for half an hour with his back to a wall and his charge on his knees, out of the eyeline of the phones. I asked for water and something hot, because I had watched Elias Rourke swallow twice while he spoke, and I would have wagered my lanyard he had not eaten since the border. And I asked for the manifest and the operational file on his connecting flight, because a knot had been tightening in my mind since I read the sealed order, and I wanted to untie it before it became a noose. The chair came first. I walked the sergeant to it myself, clearing a path with nothing more than my raised hand and my blood-colored lanyard, and the strange thing, the thing I still turn over, is that the crowd did not go back to its hurry once the salute was done. It should have. Crowds are forgetful. That is their mercy and their cruelty both. But this one did not disperse. People drifted, yes, and boarding calls pulled some of them away, but a kind of attentiveness stayed behind them, a sense of the concourse having quietly agreed that something was happening in its midst, and that decent people did not simply walk over it. As I settled Rourke into the chair, and he would only half sit, perched forward, the case upright on his thighs and both arms still around it, unable even now to fully let his guard down, I saw that a loose ring of people had arranged itself at a respectful distance, not crowding, not filming any longer for the most part, simply present, keeping a kind of watch with him. The old man in the brown coat had taken a seat 10 feet away and folded his hands over his cap and set himself there like a sentry who had found his post at last. "Drink the water first," I said, crouching to Rourke's level. "Then the tea. That's not procedure, that's an order, and I've decided I outrank you inside this terminal." The corner of his mouth moved, the first thing close to a smile I had seen from him. He drank the water. His hand shook very slightly on the cup, and he was ashamed of it, and I pretended not to see. "Colour Sergeant," I said, "while you get your breath, I need to look at something, and I'd rather do it in front of you than behind your back. Your connecting flight. Tell me about it." "Military charter," he said. "Repatriation flight, chartered by the regiment, cleared to carry Danic and me and the honor party home to Eldermore Central, where his mother and the regiment will receive him. We staged through here because the direct route was closed, weather over the mountains, then a fault with the first aircraft. 3 days of it. Every delay, I have had to find somewhere to stand and hold him and wait, in airports that were not expecting us, in front of people who did not know what they were looking at." He said it without accusation. That was the worst of it. He had stopped expecting to be understood, and he had made his peace with that, and the peace was more damning than any complaint. I opened the operational file they brought me, and the knot in my mind pulled tight, because the knot had been right. The charter that was to carry Danic Wren home was scheduled out of a stand at the far military apron, on the south side of the field. I checked the clock and my stomach dropped. 1 hour and 11 minutes. But the file had a flag on it. Red operational flag, time-stamped 40 minutes earlier, while I had been in the gray room nearly ruining a good man's morning. The charter's slot had been bumped. A diplomatic movement had been given priority on the south apron, and the repatriation flight had been pushed back, and this was the part that turned my blood to water, provisionally reassigned to a later window that did not yet have a firm time. In the flat language of airport operations, Danic Wren was going to be told to wait. Again. In his own kingdom, 400 miles from his mother, a young man who had waited long enough. And the person who had authorized bumping the slot, according to the file, the person whose initials sat in the box beside the reassignment, was R.V. Rennick Vosk did not work the apron. But Vosk sat on the Terminal Operations Committee, and Vosk had access to the movement's desk, and Vosk had walked out of that gray room 40 minutes ago with the words "This is on you," frost, ringing in the air, and Vosk was exactly the kind of man who, having lost a fight in a small room, would find a quiet lever somewhere else and pull it and call it procedure. I did not have proof. I had initials and a timestamp and a lifetime's knowledge of the man. It was enough for me. I did not tell Elias Rourke. Not yet. He had enough weight on him without carrying the knowledge that a man in his own homeland was using a movement's desk to make his dead friend wait out of spite. I stood up and I kept my face still. I had learned something about a still face that morning from a master of it, and I said, "Drink your tea, Colour Sergeant. I have a small operational matter to attend to, and then I'm going to walk you to your aircraft myself. Give me 10 minutes. Then I went and made the 2 hardest phone calls of my career, back to back, in the little glass office behind the assistant's desk with the door shut and the blinds down. The first was to the movement's desk. I will not pretend it went well. I asked, then I insisted, then I was told, in the careful voice of a man reading me a rule I had spent my life enforcing on others, that a slot reassignment authorized by a committee member could not be reversed by a terminal duty manager, that the diplomatic movement had priority under a protocol I could not overturn, and that if I wished to challenge it I could file a review, which would be heard in the ordinary way in due course. Due course. There is no phrase in my whole industry I have come to hate more. Due course is where decency goes to be told to wait. So I made the second call, and to make it I had to do the thing I had refused out of pride, to do out on the concourse when Rourke first offered me his sealed order. I had refused then to believe the paper. Now I was going to stake everything on it. On the sealed order there was a line I had skimmed and dismissed as boilerplate, a contact for the office of the regiment's patron to be reached in any matter touching the conduct or dignity of the repatriation. Below it was a name and a number and a crest, and the name was Her Royal Highness the Princess Adela, patron of the King's Guard. I looked at that number for a long moment. Every instinct of 19 careful years told me that a terminal duty manager does not telephone a royal household about a bumped apron slot, that there were channels, that it was above my station, outside my authority, wildly beyond anything my job description imagined. And then I looked through the blinds at Elias Rourke, perched on the edge of the executive chair with his friend in his arms and his hands still not able to rest. And I looked at the old man keeping watch beside him, and I thought about the phrase due course, and I picked up the phone, and I dialed the number under the hand of the king. It did not ring for long. The voice that answered was a man's, crisp and courteous, an equerry's voice giving nothing away. I said my name and my post and my terminal, and I heard how absurd it sounded even as I said it, a duty manager at an airport calling this number. And then I stopped apologizing for existing, because there was no time, and I told him the plain shape of it. That Colour Sergeant Elias Rourke was in my terminal, bringing Lance-Corporal Danic Wren of the King's Guard home to his mother. That the repatriation charter had been bumped from its apron slot in favor of a diplomatic movement and reassigned to a window with no firm time. That I believed, though I could not yet prove, that the bump had been engineered out of spite by a member of my own staff. And that I was not calling to make trouble, but because the sealed order in the sergeant's coat named this number for any matter touching the dignity of the repatriation, and I could not think of anything that touched its dignity more than a fallen guardsman being told, in his own kingdom, to wait his turn behind a diplomat. There was a silence on the line, not an offended silence, a listening one. Then the equerry said, "Hold the line, please. Do not hang up." And there was a click and a stretch of nothing, and I stood in my little glass office with my heart going hard and watched Elias Rourke through the blinds and thought, well, Frost, you have certainly done it now, whatever it turns out to be. The voice that came back on the line was not the equerry's. It was a woman's, low and clear and completely without ceremony, and it said, "This is Adela. You are the manager who telephoned about Colour Sergeant Rourke. Tell me his exact situation and be quick and be accurate because I am about to make some people's morning very difficult and I would like to aim it correctly. I have been asked since what it is like to speak to a princess. People imagine it must be grand. It was not grand. It was the most efficient conversation I have ever had. She asked 4 questions. She asked the slot number. She asked the name of the diplomatic movement that had been given priority. She asked the timestamp on the reassignment and the initials in the authorization box. And she asked whether Colour Sergeant Rourke knew that his flight had been bumped, and when I said no, that I had not been able to bring myself to tell him, there was the smallest pause, and then she said, "Good. Don't. He has carried enough. Let him carry that boy and nothing else. The rest is mine now." And then she said something I did not expect, something that changed the whole texture of the morning for me. She said, "I knew Danic Wren, not well. But I am patron of that regiment, and I make a point of learning my guardsmen, and I stood in the yard the day his intake passed out, and I shook his hand, and his mother cried and apologized for crying, and he told her in front of me to stop embarrassing him in front of the princess, and we all laughed, his mother and I and the sergeant major and the boy. He was 20 at the time. He had a gap in his teeth and he could not stop grinning. I have shaken a great many hands. I remember his." Her voice did not break. It was steadier than mine, but there was something underneath the steadiness, banked down and burning, that I recognized, because it was the same thing I had heard under Elias Rourke's stillness in the gray room. "So, here is what will happen. You will keep the sergeant comfortable, and you will tell no one but your own most trusted people what is coming. The slot will be restored. I will see to the apron myself, and I would not want to be the committee member whose initials are in that box when I ask him to explain them to me. and I am coming to the terminal. I want to receive Colour Sergeant Rourke and his charge in person, and I want the regiment's honor party to meet them at the aircraft, and I want it done properly at last in the open, where it should have been done all along. Can your terminal manage that, manager? Yes, your Royal Highness, I said. My terminal can manage that. My terminal will manage nothing else today. 35 minutes, she said. Hold everything until I am there. And manager, the banked thing in her voice came a little nearer the surface. You could have let him wait in due course. Most would have. Thank you for being someone who telephoned instead. And the line went dead, and I stood there holding a dead phone in a glass office, and I found that my own face was not still at all, that it had stopped being still somewhere in the middle of a gap-toothed boy grinning in a barracks yard, and I let it not be still for exactly 10 seconds, and then I put the phone down and wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand and went back out to do my job. I did not tell Rourke about the princess. She had told me not to, and beyond that I understood now the mercy in it. A man at the very end of his strength cannot be given a new thing to hold. So I told him only that his flight had been confirmed and protected, that the earlier confusion over the slot had been resolved at a level well above me, and that he was to sit and rest and let me and my people carry the logistics for the last stretch. He searched my face. He was very good at reading faces, better than I was, and I had the uncomfortable sense that he saw more than I was saying. But he chose in the end to trust me, and it was a gift, that trust, given how our morning had begun. Then may I tell you about him, Rourke said quietly, while we wait, because I have been carrying him for 4 days and I have not been able to say his name aloud to a single person who wanted to hear it, and I find I would like to, if you have the time. I sat down beside him. I keyed my radio off. I have the time, I said. Tell me about Danic Wren. And he did. He told me, in the low, spare, unhurried voice of a man who has learned to fold enormous feeling into small words, about a boy from a mill town in the north who had joined the King's Guard because his father had done it, and his father before him, and who had turned out, to everyone's surprise, most of all his own, to be extraordinarily good at the one thing the Guard prizes above marching and shooting and the wearing of the uniform, which is steadiness. You cannot teach it, Rourke said. You can teach a man to stand still. You cannot teach him to be calm while he does it. Danic was calm all the way down to the bottom. On the honor detail abroad, when a crowd got frightening and crowds get frightening at a legation in a hard posting, Danic was the one the young ones looked at, because if Danic's face was easy then things could not be as bad as they seemed. He steadied everyone. He was 23 and he steadied grown men twice his service. He paused. That is what he was doing, at the end. There was a crush, a panic at the legation gates, and people, ordinary people, families, were going to be hurt in it, and Danic went into it to pull them clear and keep them calm, and he did, he got them clear, all of them. And then the thing that had started the panic reached the gate, and he stood in it so that the last of them could get behind him, and it did not go the way it should have gone. He stopped. I did not fill the silence. I had learned that much. He was not killed being brave in the way the recruiting posters mean, Rourke said at last. He was killed being kind. He was killed steadying frightened strangers who were not his countrymen and would never know his name. That is who is in this case. That is who nearly got told to wait his turn on your apron. I do not say it to shame you. You have already understood it. I say it because someone in this kingdom today, other than his mother, should know exactly who is coming home, and I have chosen you. I could not speak for a moment. When I could, I said the only true thing I had. Thank you for choosing me. I'll try to deserve it for the rest of the day. That was when the setback came, the way setbacks always come, at the exact moment you have let yourself hope. My radio, which I had switched off, was not the only radio in the terminal. A marshal came at a fast walk from the direction of the south corridor, and his face was wrong, and he bent to my ear rather than say it aloud in front of Rourke, and what he whispered stood the hair up on my neck all over again. Frost. Vosk's down at the south transfer point. He's got 2 of his security people with him, and he's telling the apron staff that there's an unresolved screening incident on the repatriation charter, that the case in the hall was flagged and never cleared to his satisfaction, and he's ordering the aircraft held and the escort rescreened before it can board. He's using the incident log. Your incident log. The one you opened when you called him in. He's turning your own paperwork into a wall. I have thought since about how nearly Rennick Vosk won. He had found the one lever a man like him always finds. He was not going to strike Elias Rourke. He was not going to shout. He was going to be scrupulous. He was going to insist, with the incident log open in his hand, on procedure. The very thing I had built my career on. The very thing I had used against Rourke myself an hour before. And he was going to make it look, to anyone reviewing it later, like caution, like diligence, like a man doing his difficult job. And the beauty of it, from Vosk's cold vantage, was that every minute he spent being scrupulous was a minute Danic Wren spent not going home, and there was no rule I could name that made a screening take too long. Cruelty dressed as care is the hardest cruelty to fight, because to fight it you have to be willing to be called reckless. I stood up. I did not run. You never run in a terminal. Running is a message, and it is always the wrong one. But I walked with a purpose that cleared people out of my way, and I went down the south corridor toward the transfer point with my radio in my hand, and my lanyard the color of dried blood swinging against my chest. And I found Rennick Vosk exactly where the marshal had said, standing at the head of the jet bridge access with 2 of his people and a clutch of frightened apron staff, holding a printout of my incident log like a warrant. "Frost," he said when he saw me, and he did not even bother to look guilty. "Good, you can co-sign the hold. There's an open incident on this movement, your incident, opened by you, never formally closed, and I'm not comfortable clearing a flagged item to an aircraft without a full rescreen. I'm sure you understand. It's exactly the standard you'd hold anyone else to." He was so pleased with himself. He thought he had built a wall out of my own bricks. "Close it," I said. "I'm sorry." "The incident. You want it closed before the aircraft moves. Fine. I'm the manager who opened it, and I'm closing it right now, verbally, logged, witnessed by these good people, on the grounds that the item was screened in my presence, cleared by wand, arch, and swab, and found to contain exactly what its lawful authorization says it contains, the personal effects and colors of a fallen king's guardsman under a repatriation order signed by the king. Incident closed. There is no open flag. Stand your people down and clear the bridge." Vosk's face did the thing I had been waiting 19 years to see it do. It cracked, very slightly, along the certainty. "You don't get to close it just because." "I get to close what I open, Rennick. That's the one thing about incidents you never understood. You think procedure is a wall you can hide behind. It isn't. It's a set of doors, and every door has someone whose job is to decide when it opens. And on this one today, in this terminal, that someone is me. You reassigned the apron slot. I know you did. Your initials are in the box, and the timestamp says you did it 11 minutes after I told you to step back from a grieving man. You have spent the last hour using every quiet lever you could reach to make sure that a dead boy waited, because you lost an argument in a small gray room, and you would rather punish a coffin than admit it. And I want you to understand that it's over, and I want you to understand exactly why it's over, because you're going to want the reason for the review you'll be filing. I keyed my radio, and I said, loud enough for the apron staff to hear, "Control, confirm the standing of the repatriation charter on the south apron." Control's voice came back, and there was something in it, a kind of hush, that told me the news had already reached them. "Frost, the charter's slot is restored and locked at the highest authority. And Frost, you should get back up to Hall B. There's a royal movement inbound to the terminal. Household cars are 2 minutes out. It's the Princess Adela. She's coming to the concourse." I watched that land on Rennick Vosk. I watched him understand that the wall he had built out of my bricks had just had the ground pulled out from under it by a hand he could not possibly out-argue, and that the reassignment with his initials in the box was now going to be read, not by a committee in due course, but by the patron of the regiment whose fallen son he had tried to delay. I did not gloat. I found, to my own surprise, that I had no wish to. Watching Vosk go gray and silent gave me none of the satisfaction I had imagined it would across 3 years of working his shifts. It only made me tired and sad and certain of one thing, that the difference between us had never been rank or nerve. It had been that when the truth walked into a gray room and laid a sealed order on a steel table, one of us had let it change him, and one of us had not. "Go home, Rennick," I said, not unkindly. "You're off the floor, don't be here when she comes, for your own sake." He went. He did not say anything. His 2 people looked at me, and I nodded them back to their posts, and the apron staff let out a collective breath, and one of them, a young woman who could not have been long in the job, said to me quietly, "Is it true? Is it really a fallen guardsman?" And when I said yes, it is, she straightened up without being told to and squared the papers in her hands and said, "Then let's get him home properly," and I could have kissed her for it. That is the thing I have carried longest out of that whole strange day, not Vosk's face cracking, but a young apron worker deciding, unprompted, to stand a little straighter for a stranger she would never meet. Decency is more contagious than we let ourselves believe. It only needs one person to stop being careful about the wrong things. I went back up to Hall B at something close to a run after all, because 2 minutes is not long, and I wanted to be beside Elias Rourke when it happened. He was still in the executive chair, the case upright on his knees, the old man in the brown coat keeping his patient watch beside him. But the concourse around them had changed again while I was gone. Word had moved through the terminal the way word does, not by announcement, but by the slow-spreading murmur of people telling the people next to them, "That man there, the soldier, do you know who he's carrying?" And each person who heard it going quiet and still and passing it on. The loose, respectful ring around Rourke had thickened. People had come off the upper gallery to stand at the rail and look down. The coffee machines had, somehow, gone silent. And I understood that the salute the old man had given an hour before had not faded after all. It had gone underground and traveled, person to person, all through the North Terminal, and it was about to come back up into the open all at once. I reached Rourke's chair just as the far doors of Hall B opened, and the Princess Adela came in. She came without fanfare, which was somehow the most commanding way she could have come. No announcement over the PA, no cordon of officials sweeping ahead. She simply walked through the doors in a dark coat of her own, plain and well-cut, flanked by 2 aides and a small escort, and behind her, and this was what put the whole terminal on its feet, came the honor party. 6 guardsmen of the King's Guard in their long dark ceremonial coats, moving in the slow, exact, deliberate step that is not marching but something older and graver than marching, the pace you keep only for the dead. They came through the doors 2 by 2, and their heels struck the polished stone of my ordinary terminal in perfect unison, and the sound of it, that measured, unhurried, unbreakable step, went through the concourse like a bell. I have tried many times to describe what happened next, and I have never got it quite right, because it did not happen the way things happen in films. Nobody gave an order. There was no swelling music, no single dramatic moment. What there was, instead, was a wave, a slow, spontaneous, spreading wave of people getting to their feet. It started near the doors, where people could see the honor party clearly, and it moved outward and upward through the whole terminal as people rose from the molded benches and set down their bags and their coffees and their phones and stood. The travelers at the gates stood. The people at the rail of the upper gallery stood, and those who were sitting rose to join them. The staff behind the check-in desks came out from behind their counters and stood. A queue at the security channel dissolved as everyone in it turned and stood. I watched a whole concourse of hurried, private, distracted strangers, the least reverent congregation in the world, I had called them, and I had been so wrong, put down their small emergencies all at once and stand, in silence, for a young man most of them had never heard of until an hour before. And Elias Rourke rose from the chair. He rose slowly, with the case held to his chest, and I saw what it cost him, 4 days of it in the set of his shoulders. And I saw him find, from somewhere past the bottom of his strength, the bearing to meet the moment as it deserved. The Princess Adela crossed the concourse to him through the standing crowd, and she stopped in front of him, and for a moment the patron of the regiment and the last guardian of one of its sons simply looked at each other. Then she did not offer her hand for him to bow over. Instead she came to attention herself, there in the middle of my terminal, a princess of the realm, and she inclined her head to the black case in his arms, to Danic Wren, in a slow, deep, deliberate bow, and she held it, and the whole silent terminal watched her hold it. "Colour Sergeant Rourke," she said, and though she did not raise her voice it carried in that stillness to the far walls. "You have brought him home. You have not slept, and you have not set him down, and you have not let one careless hand or one small cruelty touch his dignity in 2,000 miles, and I know what the last hour of it cost you in this place, and I am sorry for it, and I am here to make sure the last of the journey is done as it should be. The regiment has come for him. His mother is waiting at Eldermere Central with the whole town beside her. You are almost there. Will you let us walk the rest of it with you?" Rourke's discipline, which had held through the border and the grey room and the long days, very nearly did not hold through that. I saw it waver. I saw the bright rim come to his eyes and stay there, not falling, held by an act of will I will never fully understand. And when he answered, his voice was steady, because he made it be. "Ma'am," he said, "I have been afraid the whole way that he would come home unwitnessed, that men die far off doing kind, unglamorous things, and the world is busy and no one stands. I did not think," he stopped and mastered it and went on, "I did not think a terminal full of strangers would stand. I will be honest with your Royal Highness. I did not think anyone would stand at all. And they are standing." He looked then past the princess, at the risen concourse, at the old man in the brown coat holding his cloth cap over his heart, at the young apron worker who had come up from the south corridor and was standing at attention in her high-visibility vest, at the businessman with his phone lowered and his head bowed, at all of them, the ordinary, unreverent, hurrying people of my terminal, standing in a silence you could have knelt in. "They are standing," he said again, wonderingly, as though he needed to say it twice to believe it. "Then it was worth being afraid. He is witnessed. Yes, ma'am, walk the rest of it with me. Let's take him home." The honor party formed up around him. 3 guardsmen ahead, 3 behind, and the Colour Sergeant in the center with the case in his arms and the Princess Adela at his side, and they set off down the length of Hall B toward the south corridor and the waiting aircraft, at that slow, exact, unhurried pace, and the standing crowd did the last thing, the thing I did not expect and will never forget. As the little procession passed, each section of the crowd it passed through did not simply watch it go. They followed it with their eyes, and then, softly, they began. I do not know who started it. I do not think anyone started it. I think it started everywhere at once. They began to bring their hands together. Not applause, not the bright rattling noise of a crowd at a show. It was slower and deeper than that. A low, steady, rolling sound that moved down the concourse ahead of the procession and behind it, keeping pace with that grave, deliberate step. A sound like a great heart beating, the sound of several hundred strangers who did not have a salute to give and had found the only other thing their hands knew how to do to say, "We see him. We honor him. He did not come home unwitnessed." I walked at the back of it, behind the last 2 guardsmen, with the old man in the brown coat beside me, because I had taken his arm and he had let me, and neither of us tried to speak, because there was nothing that would not have been smaller than the silence. We walked the whole length of my terminal that way, through the standing crowd and the low rolling sound, and I who had spent 19 years making sure that no one ever noticed the terminal at all watched my terminal become, for 11 minutes, the most seen and the most sacred place in the kingdom. and I understood at last what I had almost done in the gray room, and what I had been given the chance to help undo, and I was more grateful than I have the words for that I had not been too proud, in the end, to let the truth change me. At the South Transfer Point, where an hour before Rennick Vosk had built a wall out of my own bricks, the apron doors stood open, and beyond them in the gray Aldermere morning, the repatriation charter waited with its slot restored and locked, and a ramp led up into the light. The honor party halted. The Princess Adela stepped back, and Colour Sergeant Elias Rourke turned at the threshold with his friend in his arms, and looked back down the corridor at the terminal full of standing people, and he did the only thing he could not do while his hands were full. He could not raise a hand to them, so he bowed to them instead, a slow, deep bow to the whole standing crowd, on behalf of the young man in the case who could not bow for himself. And then he turned and carried Danic Wren up the ramp and into the light, and the doors closed. And it was done. The terminal did not go back to normal all at once. It came back slowly, the way you come back from somewhere very deep, people sitting down again a little dazed, picking up their bags, glancing at one another with the shy, uncertain half-smiles of strangers who have shared something and do not have a word for it. The coffee machine started again. A boarding call went out. The river of hurried private people gathered itself back up and began once more to flow. But it was not quite the same river. I do not think a person can stand for something like that and be entirely the same afterward, and I know for a fact that the terminal staff were not, because for weeks afterward I would catch them standing a little straighter at odd moments, and once I found the young apron worker from the South Corridor teaching a new colleague, in a low, serious voice. The story of the morning, a fallen guardsman came through and the whole terminal stood, and getting it, I noticed, almost exactly right. The Princess Adela found me before she left. I had expected her to sweep out the way important people sweep out, but she came back up the corridor to where I was standing with the old man in the brown coat, and she stopped in front of us, and to the old man she said, "I saw your salute. It was the first one. Everything that followed came from you. Thank you, sir. What is your name?" And he told her a name I will keep to myself, because it was his and he gave it to her quietly, and she took his hand in both of hers and held it, and he stood there in his brown coat, an old soldier who had missed 2 flights to keep a stranger's vigil, and I do not think anyone had held his hand like that in a very long time. Then she turned to me. "You made a telephone call you were not required to make," she said, "and you closed an incident a colleague was trying to keep open, and you did it knowing there would be a review, and knowing whose initials were in the box, and knowing that being reckless on behalf of a dead man's dignity is exactly the kind of thing that ends careers like yours. I want you to know that the review will find you acted entirely correctly because I intend to be at it, and I intend to be very interested in the reassignment of that apron slot. But I did not come back to tell you that you are safe. I came back to tell you something more useful." She looked at me steadily. "You have spent your life, I think, being the one who cannot be talked around. It is a fine thing in its place. But the reason today did not end in disgrace is that you turned out to be a person who could be talked around by the right thing at the last possible moment. Do not lose the first quality, but guard the second one more carefully than the first, because it is rarer and the world has more need of it. Good morning, manager. My kingdom is in better hands than it knows, on the quiet floors where no one is watching." And she went. There was a review. Of course there was a review. There is always a review. Rennick Vosk filed his, and I filed mine, and the reassignment of the apron slot with his initials and its 11-minute timestamp was examined by people who understood exactly what they were looking at, and the Princess Adela was, as she had promised, very interested. Vosk did not go to prison. He had broken no law, only a decency, and you cannot be jailed for the second. But a man who bumps a fallen soldier's homecoming out of spite and then tries to build a wall of procedure around a coffin does not stay in a position of trust in an international terminal, and Rennick Vosk does not work at Aldermere anymore, and I have not heard where he went, and I find I do not need to. The last I saw of him was his gray, silent face in the south corridor, and I have made my peace with feeling nothing about it but a distant, tired sorrow for a man who chose, at every fork, to be certain rather than kind. I flew to Eldermore Central 3 weeks later on my own time, and I stood at the back of a crowd in a mill town in the north, a town I had no business in, 400 miles from my terminal, and I watched them dedicate a small plaque on the wall of a drill hall to Lance-Corporal Danic Wren, King's Guard, 23 years old, who died steadying frightened strangers at a legation gate and was brought home by a friend who would not set him down. Elias Rourke was there in the ceremonial dark coat, standing at the head of the honor party, and his face had its stillness back, its true stillness now, the kind that is calm all the way to the bottom, and I understood that he had learned it over years from the very young man he had carried home. Danic Wren's mother stood beside the plaque. When it was unveiled, she did not weep the way I had braced myself to see. She laid her hand flat against her son's name, the way Rourke had laid his hand flat against the top of the case, and she stood like that for a while, and then she turned and found in the crowd the tall soldier at the head of the honor party, and she went to him and put her arms around him, and Elias Rourke, who had not set his friend down in 2,000 miles, finally, at last, in the arms of the boy's mother, allowed himself to be held. He saw me at the back of the crowd afterward. I had not meant him to. I had come to stand at the edge and witness and leave, the way I now believe most good things in the world are done. But he came over and he took my hand and he said, "You came all this way." I wanted to see him get home the whole way, I said. I only saw the last mile of it. I wanted to see the end. The end, Rourke said, and he looked at the plaque and at the mother and at the town that had turned out entire and at the drill hall his friend's father and grandfather had marched from. There isn't one. That's what I've learned carrying him. You think you're bringing a man to an end. You're not. You're bringing him to the beginning of how he gets remembered. He'll be on that wall long after you and I are gone, and boys will read his name and stand a little straighter, and not one of them will know your name or mine or the old man in the brown coats, and it will not matter, because we were never the point. We were only the ones who happened to be standing there when it was time to carry something. That's all any of us are, in the end. The ones who happened to be there when it was time to carry something. The only question that matters is whether we set it down. I have not set it down. That is the truth of why I have written all this. I am still Nadia Frost, and I still run a terminal, and I am still, mostly, the one who cannot be talked around. I have not lost the first quality, as the princess told me not to. But there is a photograph in the drawer of my glass office now, one of the hundreds taken that morning, that someone sent me afterward. A whole concourse of ordinary people on their feet in perfect silence, and a soldier at the center of them with a black case held to his chest. And it is there so that on the days when I am tempted to be certain rather than kind, when someone comes toward my terminal not fitting the shape of the rules and every trained instinct in me says here is a problem, I can look at it and remember. Remember that the most important traveler I ever nearly turned away carried no ticket and made no complaint, and had already been through more than I would see in my life. Remember that decency needs only one person to stop being careful about the wrong things. And remember the low, rolling, heart-deep sound of several hundred strangers who did not have a salute to give, finding all at once the other thing their hands knew how to do, and standing, until a good man had carried his friend all the way home.